The blood on Beatrice Thompson's hands wouldn't wash away no matter how hard she scrubbed. And not because it was really there, but because she could still feel it every single day since that awful night 3 years ago in Kansas, when everything she loved burned to ash. She stood at the edge of Pendleton, Oregon now, her worn traveling dress dusty from the stagecoach journey, her single carpetbag clutched in trembling fingers as she stared at the small boarding house that would become her new home. The year was 1883, and this was her fourth town in 3 years, running from whispers and pointed fingers and well-meaning folks who said she was too damaged, too haunted, too broken to ever be whole again. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Adeline Foster, was a round-faced woman in her 50s who asked no questions when Beatrice paid 2 months in advance with the last of her savings. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that overlooked the main street where cowboys and ranchers moved about their business in the late afternoon sun. Beatrice was 23 years old and felt ancient. She had been married once, to a kind man named Thomas who ran a dry goods store in a small Kansas town. They had a daughter, Lucy, who had just turned 2 when the fire started. No one knew how it began, that blaze that consumed the store and the living quarters above it. Beatrice had been visiting her sister one town over. She came home to ashes and 2 pine boxes and a community that looked at her with pity so thick it choked her. Then came the whispers. How strange that she survived when her family did not. How she never cried at the funeral, just stood there stone-faced and silent. How she tried to throw herself into the grave after them and had to be pulled back by 4 strong men. How she spent weeks in bed after that, not speaking, not eating, just staring at the wall until her sister feared she would waste away entirely. When she finally emerged from that darkness, she was changed, quieter, more careful. She jumped at loud noises and couldn't bear to be in enclosed spaces. The nightmares came every time she closed her eyes, dreams of flames and her daughter's voice calling for her, always just out of reach. The town doctor said her nerves were shattered. The town preacher said she needed to pray more to find peace in the Lord's plan. The town gossip said she was mad, broken beyond repair, and that it was a mercy she had no other children to frighten with her ways, so she left. She tried Denver first, working as a seamstress, but the family she worked for let her go when they discovered her history. Too unsettling for the children, they said. Then a small settlement in Wyoming, where she lasted 6 months before a well-meaning widow tried to set her up with her bachelor son, and Beatrice had a fit of panic, so severe she couldn't breathe. The widow spread word that she was unfit for polite society, touched in the head, and Beatrice moved on again. Now Pendleton, a growing town in eastern Oregon with wheat fields stretching to the horizon and cattle ranches dotting the rolling hills. A place where maybe, just maybe, no one would know her story and she could simply exist quietly until her days ran out. She found work at the hotel restaurant, washing dishes in the back where she didn't have to interact with customers much. The owner, Mr. Henderson, was a gruff older man who cared more about the work getting done than about making conversation, which suited Beatrice perfectly. She kept her head down, her hands busy, and tried not to think about the life she had lost. 3 weeks into her new existence, Ethan Zimmerman walked into the restaurant, and though Beatrice didn't know it yet, everything was about to change. She was carrying a tray of clean glasses from the kitchen to the front when she saw him at the counter, talking to Sally, the waitress who handled the customers. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, denim pants, and a worn cotton shirt, boots that had seen plenty of miles, a hat in his hands as he spoke to Sally with an easy smile. Beatrice looked away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring, and continued to the shelf where the glasses were stored. But she could hear their conversation in the quiet afternoon lull between lunch and dinner. "I appreciate you keeping an eye out," Ethan was saying, his voice a low rumble that held warmth. "The ranch is doing well enough, but I could use someone who can handle basic cooking and some light housekeeping. Nothing fancy required." "Most of the single women in town are spoken for or not interested in ranch work," Sally replied. "It's isolated out there, Ethan. 10 miles from town is a far piece for most folks. I know, I'm not looking for, it's just work. Fair wages, separate quarters in the small cabin near the main house, respectful arrangement. I just can't keep living on beans and burnt steak while trying to run the place myself." Sally laughed. "Your cooking is that bad? Worse. Last week, I somehow made coffee that was both too weak and too bitter at the same time. I have a gift." Beatrice found herself almost smiling at that, the first hint of such an expression in longer than she could remember. She finished placing the glasses and turned to head back to the kitchen, but Sally called out, "Beatrice, come here a moment, will you?" She froze, her heart suddenly hammering. She didn't like being put on the spot, didn't like attention of any kind. But refusing would cause more fuss than complying, so she walked slowly to the counter, keeping her eyes down. "Beatrice Thompson, this is Ethan Zimmerman. He runs a cattle ranch outside town. Ethan, Beatrice is new to Pendleton and might be interested in work." "Oh, I have work here," Beatrice said quickly, her voice soft and rusty from disuse. "Thank you, but I'm fine." "Just hear him out," Sally pressed gently. She was a kind woman, and Beatrice knew she meant well, but this was too much, too fast. "I don't want to impose," Ethan said, and something in his tone made Beatrice glance up briefly. His eyes were gray, she noticed, like storm clouds, and they held a gentleness that surprised her. "But if you're ever interested, the offer stands. It's honest work, and I promise I'm not difficult to work for. The ranch is called the Running Z, about 10 miles northeast of town. Anyone can give you directions if you change your mind." She nodded once, a jerky movement, then escaped back to the kitchen where her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the sink to steady herself. Mr. Henderson glanced at her, grunted, and went back to his account books. He had seen her like this before, and had learned to just let her be until it passed. That should have been the end of it. But over the following weeks, Ethan Zimmerman became a regular presence at the restaurant, coming in for meals a few times a week when he was in town for supplies. He always sat at the counter, always greeted everyone politely, and always left a generous tip. He never pushed or pried into Beatrice's business, but he had a way of making cheerful small talk with Sally and Mr. Henderson that Beatrice couldn't help overhearing from her position in the kitchen. She learned things about him in those overheard fragments. He was 28 years old. He had inherited the ranch from his uncle 2 years ago, a man who had no children of his own and saw potential in his sister's son. Ethan had been working as a hired hand on various ranches since he was 16, learning the trade, and was trying his best to make the Running Z successful. He had a dog named Rusty, a horse named Copper, and a terrible habit of optimism that made Sally laugh. "You really think you can get those north pastures cleared and planted before winter?" Sally asked him one September afternoon. "I have to try," Ethan replied cheerfully. "Uncle James always said those fields could support winter wheat if someone put in the work. And if I'm wrong, well, I'll have learned something and can try differently next year." "That's a good attitude," Sally said. "More folks could use some of that around here." Beatrice, washing dishes in the kitchen, thought that optimism was dangerous. It made you believe things could be good. could last. And then when they were ripped away, the fall was so much worse. But she couldn't deny that something about Ethan Zimmerman drew her attention despite herself. Maybe it was the way he treated everyone with the same easy respect, from the mayor to the stable boy. Maybe it was how he once stopped a drunk cowboy from harassing Sally, doing it with calm words rather than fists, diffusing the situation with such practiced ease that everyone relaxed. Or maybe it was something she couldn't name, a pull she didn't understand and didn't want to examine too closely. October came with cooling temperatures and brilliant autumn colors in the trees along the Umatilla River that ran near town. Beatrice had been in Pendleton for 2 months and had fallen into a routine that felt almost safe. Work at the restaurant, return to the boarding house, read in her room until exhaustion let her sleep. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. The panic attacks were more manageable. She spoke little, kept to herself, and most people in town had learned to leave her be. Then Mrs. Foster announced she was selling the boarding house and moving to Portland to live with her daughter, and Beatrice's fragile stability shattered. "I'm so sorry for the short notice, Mrs. Foster said, wringing her hands. "But my daughter just had her 3rd baby and she needs help. The new owner is taking over in 2 weeks, and he wants to renovate the whole place, turn it into a proper hotel. He's not keeping any of the current residents." Beatrice nodded numbly and retreated to her room to calculate her options. She had enough money for maybe a month at the hotel, but the cost would eat through her savings quickly. There were no other boarding houses in Pendleton, and the idea of moving to yet another town, starting over again, filled her with a weariness so deep it ached in her bones. She was 23 years old and so tired of running. The next day at work she was quieter than usual, and even Mr. Henderson noticed. "You sick?" he asked gruffly. "No, sir, just tired." Sally was more perceptive. During a lull she came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "I heard about Mrs. Foster. That's rough timing." Beatrice kept scrubbing a pot. "I'll figure something out. You could ask Ethan about that job. The offer's still open as far as I know. He was in yesterday asking if I knew anyone." "I can't." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Why not?" "The pay's good and you'd have your own place. Better than the hotel rates." "Because I can't be around people," Beatrice wanted to say. "Because I'll disappoint him like I've disappointed everyone else. Because I'm broken in ways that can't be fixed, and it's only a matter of time before I fall apart again." But she just shook her head and said nothing, and Sally, sensing she had pushed enough, let it drop. That night, Beatrice lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling and trying to formulate a plan. She could try to find work that included lodging, maybe as a live-in housekeeper for a family. But the last time she had tried that, it had ended badly. She could use most of her savings to travel to another town, but the thought made her want to weep. She was so tired of being a stranger, of starting over, of the constant vigilance required to keep herself together in new places with new people. She thought of the ranch, of Ethan Zimmerman's easy smile and patient demeanor. Separate quarters, he had said. Honest work. 10 miles from town meant isolation, which both terrified and appealed to her. Fewer people to witness if she broke down, but also fewer people to help if she did. 3 days before she had to leave the boarding house, desperation finally overrode fear. She asked Mr. Henderson for a Saturday afternoon off, a request so unusual that he agreed immediately, probably worried she was quitting. Then, with her heart pounding so hard she felt sick, she asked Sally for directions to the Running Z Ranch. "You're going to take the job?" Sally's face lit up. "Oh, Beatrice, that's wonderful. Ethan's a good man. You'll be safe there." Safe. Such a strange word. Beatrice hadn't felt safe since the night of the fire, wasn't sure she remembered what it truly meant. but she nodded and memorized the directions, and tried to ignore the panic rising in her chest. The walk took her 3 hours, following the main road northeast out of town, then turning onto a smaller track that wound through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. It was a clear October day, the sky painfully blue, the air crisp and clean. Under different circumstances, Beatrice might have found it beautiful. As it was, she just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, her carpet bag in hand in case she needed to go straight from the ranch to the hotel without returning to the boarding house. The running Z revealed itself gradually, the land dipping into a shallow valley where a creek ran through, cottonwood trees golden along its banks. The main house was a sturdy wooden structure, not large but well maintained, with a porch across the front and a stone chimney on one side. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, and a smaller cabin set about 50 yards from the main house. As Beatrice approached, a dog barked, and a moment later, Ethan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He stopped when he saw her, surprise clear on his face, then smiled and walked toward her. "Miss Thompson, this is unexpected. Good unexpected," he added quickly, as if worried she might bolt. "What brings you all the way out here now that she was here?" Words failed her. She stood there, gripping her carpet bag, trying to force her voice to work. Ethan waited patiently, not pushing, and that small kindness was what finally broke through her paralysis. "The job," she managed. "Is it still available?" His face brightened. "Yes, absolutely." "Would you like to talk about it? Come up to the porch, I'll get you some water. You must have walked the whole way." She followed him to the porch, accepted a tin cup of cool water from the pump, and sat gingerly on the edge of a chair while he settled across from her, giving her space. Rusty, a red-brown mutt of indeterminate heritage, sniffed her cautiously, then lay down at Ethan's feet. "The situation is straightforward," Ethan began, his tone businesslike but kind. "I need help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general household tasks. The work isn't hard, but it's daily. In exchange, I offer wages of $15 a month, plus room and board. The small cabin would be yours, completely private. I'd expect breakfast and dinner prepared and the main house kept reasonably clean. I'm not fussy, and I'm gone most days working the ranch, so you'd have plenty of time to yourself." $15 a month was generous, more than she made at the restaurant. Room and board meant security. But there were questions she needed to ask, things she needed him to understand before he agreed to hire her. "I need to tell you something," she said, the words coming slowly. "About myself, before you decide." Ethan leaned back, his expression open. "All right. People say I'm difficult. Broken, I have. Spells where I can't breathe, can't think. Loud noises bother me. I don't sleep well. I'm not good with people." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'll work hard, I promise that, but I'm not. I'm not what most people would want in their home." He was quiet for a moment, and she braced herself for the rejection, the polite dismissal she had heard so many times before. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Miss Thompson, I'm not most people, and this isn't most homes. It's a working ranch, and life out here is hard in different ways. I don't need someone who's good at parties or conversation. I need someone reliable who can cook a decent meal and not let the house fall into complete chaos while I'm out working cattle." He paused. "As for the rest, we all have things we struggle with. Doesn't make you broken, makes you human." She stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You don't even know what happened to me." "Don't need to unless you want to tell me. Your past is your business. I care about whether you can do the work and whether we can manage a respectful working arrangement." He tilted his head. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you keep a house?" "Yes." "Then seems to me we have a deal if you want it." It was too easy. There had to be a catch, some expectation she wasn't seeing. "That's it. You're not worried about the spells or the way I am." Ethan's expression grew more serious. "Miss Thompson, I'll be plain with you. This ranch is isolated. Sometimes I don't see another soul for days. That kind of loneliness can be hard on a person. I'm offering you a job, nothing more and nothing less. I'll treat you with respect, and I expect the same in return. If you have a bad day, we'll figure it out. If the work isn't what you expected, we'll talk about it. But I'm not going to judge you for being human and having struggles. Life's too short for that kind of nonsense." Something in Beatrice's chest, some tight knot that had been there for 3 years, loosened just slightly. She didn't trust this, but she was out of options and out of fight. "When would you want me to start?" "Whenever you're ready. Today, if that suits you." I saw the carpet bag. She almost smiled. "Almost. I need to be out of the boarding house by Wednesday. Then today it is. Let me show you the cabin, and you can settle in. I'll admit I haven't been in there in a while, so it might need some cleaning, but the structure's sound." The cabin was small but charming, with a main room that held a bed, a table, and a chair, a small stove for heat, and a window that faced east toward the sunrise. There was a layer of dust over everything, and the bed needed linens, but it had good bones, as Ethan put it. He helped her carry water from the pump to scrub the floors, brought clean bedding from the main house, and by the time the sun was setting, the little cabin felt almost cozy. "I'll expect you up at the main house by 6 tomorrow morning to start breakfast," Ethan said as he prepared to leave her to settle in. "But don't worry if you need a day or two to adjust. I won't starve in the meantime." "I'll be there at 6, Beatrice said firmly. Whatever else she was reliable in her work. He nodded, tipped his hat, and headed back to the main house with Rusty trotting beside him. Beatrice stood in the doorway of her new home, watching the last light fade from the sky, and tried to understand what had just happened. She had expected judgment, questions, prying into her past. Instead, she had found a man who took her at her word, who offered her work and a place to stay without demanding anything beyond the job itself. It was so unexpected that she didn't quite know how to process it. That night, she lay in the narrow bed in the cabin, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside around her. Crickets singing their autumn song, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods by the creek. It was quieter than town, darker without the streetlights, and she thought she might have trouble sleeping in such strangeness. Instead, she slept for 7 hours straight, the longest stretch without nightmares she had managed in 3 years. She woke before dawn, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before memory returned. Her first day of work. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 serviceable dresses, pinned her dark hair into a simple bun, and made her way through the pre-dawn darkness to the main house. Ethan was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a ledger book, making notes by lamplight. He looked up when she knocked softly at the back door. "Good morning." "You didn't have to knock. Consider the kitchen your domain during working hours." He stood, gesturing around the room. "Everything you need should be here, but if something's missing, let me know and I'll get it in town. I usually eat simple. Eggs and bacon or oatmeal for breakfast, whatever's easiest. Coffee's already made, help yourself." The kitchen was large and well-equipped, clearly designed by someone who had once cared about cooking, probably his late uncle's wife. Beatrice found everything she needed easily and set about making breakfast while Ethan returned to his ledger. She was hyper-aware of his presence, but he seemed content to focus on his work, giving her space to acclimate. She made eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy, the kind of hearty meal a working man needed. When she set the plate before him, he looked at it with genuine appreciation. Miss Thompson, if this tastes half as good as it looks, I'm going to count myself blessed." He ate with the focus of someone who was truly hungry, and when he finished, he sat back with a satisfied sigh. "That was excellent. Best meal I've had in my own home in longer than I care to admit." "Thank you," Beatrice said quietly, already clearing the dishes. "I'll be out working the north pasture today, checking fences. Should be back around noon for dinner, then out again until evening. Make whatever you like for meals, I'm not particular. If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch and I'll hear it from most places on the property." She nodded, and he grabbed his hat and headed out, Rusty bounding after him. Through the window, she watched him catch and saddle Copper, a sturdy bay gelding, and ride off into the rising sun. Then she was alone with her work, and work was something she understood. She spent the morning cleaning the main house, which wasn't as bad as she expected. Ethan clearly made an effort to keep things tidy. He just lacked the time and skill for deeper cleaning. She washed windows, swept floors, dusted furniture, and scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed. The physical labor was grounding, keeping her mind focused and her hands busy. When noon approached, she made a simple dinner of stew and cornbread, and Ethan appeared right on time, looking tired but pleased with his morning's work. They ate in companionable silence, neither feeling the need to fill the quiet with forced conversation, and Beatrice found she didn't mind his presence as much as she thought she would. The days began to follow a pattern. She woke early, made breakfast, cleaned the house, prepared dinner, and then had her afternoons mostly free while Ethan worked until evening. She made supper, left it warming on the stove for him, and returned to her cabin where she could be alone with her thoughts and her books. It was a quiet existence, almost peaceful, and Beatrice waited for the other shoe to drop. But days turned into weeks, and Ethan remained true to his word. He treated her with respectful courtesy, never pried into her business, and seemed genuinely appreciative of her work. When she had a bad day, when the panic rose and her hands shook so badly she could barely hold a plate, he simply took over whatever task she was struggling with and suggested she take a walk to get some air. "No shame in having a hard moment," he said once, when she was mortified after dropping a cup that shattered across the kitchen floor. "Happens to everyone. Just breathe through it." She did, and when she returned to clean up the mess, he had already swept it up and was working on his ledgers as if nothing had happened. November arrived with cold winds and the promise of winter. Beatrice had been at the running Z for 6 weeks, and something strange was happening to her. The constant vigilance she had maintained for 3 years was starting to ease. She found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the work, into the solitude of the ranch, into the unexpected comfort of Ethan's steady presence. He wasn't like anyone she had known before. He was patient without being condescending, kind without expecting anything in return, and he had a way of seeing her as a person rather than a problem to be solved. When she flinched at a door slamming in the wind, he simply made sure to catch doors more carefully. When she couldn't bear to go into the small pantry because the enclosed space made her chest tight, he rearranged things so she could reach what she needed without going inside. He never made a fuss about these accommodations, never pointed them out or made her feel like a burden. He just quietly adjusted, and that meant more to Beatrice than he could possibly know. One cold afternoon in mid-November, she was hanging laundry on the line when she saw a rider approaching from town. She tensed, as she always did around strangers, but stayed at her task. The rider, a young man she didn't recognize, stopped at the main house and called out for Ethan. Ethan emerged from the barn, greeted the rider, and they spoke for a few minutes before the young man handed over a letter and rode off. Ethan stood there waiting, his expression growing troubled, and Beatrice felt a pang of concern that surprised her with its intensity. That evening at supper, he was quieter than usual, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. Beatrice hesitated, then broke their usual silence. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, seeming surprised that she had spoken. "What? Oh, yes. Well, no, not really. I got a letter from my sister in Kansas. My father's ill, not expected to last the winter. She thinks I should come say goodbye. Kansas." The word sent ice through Beatrice's veins. "Are you going?" "I don't know. It's complicated. My father and we're not close. He didn't approve of me taking on this ranch, wanted me to stay in Kansas and work in his store. We parted on bad terms 2 years ago, and we haven't spoken since." He rubbed his face tiredly. "But he's still my father, and if I don't go and he dies, I'll always wonder if I should have." "You should go," Beatrice heard herself say. "If there's a chance to make peace, you should take it. Those chances don't always come." She was thinking of her own father, dead 5 years now, and how she would give anything to have one more conversation with him. How she wished she could talk to her mother, gone when Beatrice was 16, and tell her about Lucy, the granddaughter she would never meet. Ethan studied her face. "You speak from experience." "Yes," he nodded slowly. "The journey would take at least 2 weeks there and back, more if the weather's bad. That's a long time to leave the ranch. I can manage things here. I know how to care for the animals. I grew up around livestock. I'll keep the place running. I couldn't ask you to take on that much. You're not asking, I'm offering." She met his eyes steadily. "You've been good to me, Mr. Zimmerman. Let me return the favor." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that made her heart skip in a way she didn't quite understand. "You've been calling me Mr. Zimmerman for 6 weeks now. My name is Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated, the name feeling strange and intimate on her tongue. "And you're Beatrice, not Miss Thompson. If we're going to trust each other with the ranch, we should at least use our names." "All right, Ethan." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "All right then, Beatrice. I'll make arrangements to leave at the end of the week. And I'll pay you extra wages for the additional work." She wanted to refuse the extra pay, but she was practical enough to accept it with a nod of thanks. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Ethan showed her every detail of the ranch operations, from caring for the horses and cattle to maintaining the equipment. He introduced her to his 2 nearest neighbors, the Martins 3 miles south and old Samuel Fletcher 4 miles east, telling them to check on her while he was gone and help if she needed anything. The Martins were a young couple with 3 small children, friendly and cheerful, though Beatrice's quiet demeanor clearly puzzled them. Samuel was a grizzled widower who had ranched in the area for 40 years and assessed Beatrice with sharp eyes before grunting his approval. "She'll do fine," he told Ethan. "Got sense in her eyes. Not flighty." The morning Ethan left, Beatrice stood on the porch and watched him ride off toward town where he would catch the stage, his saddlebags packed with clothes and his expression a mixture of determination and dread. He looked back once, raised a hand in farewell, and then he was gone, and Beatrice was alone on the running Z. She had been alone plenty of times before, but this felt different. This wasn't isolation born of fear and running away. This was responsibility, trust, purpose. She had 2 weeks to prove she could handle it. The first few days were challenging but manageable. She fell into a routine of morning and evening chores, caring for Copper and the 2 other horses, making sure the cattle had access to water and checking them for any signs of illness or injury. The weather held cold but clear, which helped. She cooked simple meals for herself, kept the fires going in both the cabin and main house, and fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. On the 5th day, the Martins stopped by with their children, bringing fresh bread and staying for a brief visit. Mrs. Martin, whose name was Clara, tried to draw Beatrice into conversation, but when she realized that was a losing battle, she chattered enough for both of them, sharing town gossip and stories about her children's antics. Beatrice found she didn't mind. Clara's cheerfulness was like a warm blanket, asking nothing in return. "Ethan's lucky to have found you," Clara said as they prepared to leave. "He's a good man, works himself half to death trying to make this place successful. He deserves someone looking after him proper." Beatrice didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and waved as they drove off in their wagon. On the 8th day, a storm rolled in, fierce and unexpected, bringing freezing rain that coated everything in ice. Beatrice spent a frantic afternoon making sure the animals were secure and had shelter, hauling extra hay to the barn, and checking that the water troughs hadn't frozen solid. By the time she finished, she was soaked through and shivering violently, but the animals were safe, and that was what mattered. She barely made it back to the cabin before her strength gave out. She peeled off her wet clothes with shaking hands, wrapped herself in every blanket she owned, and huddled by the stove trying to get warm. But the cold had sunk deep into her bones, and as the evening wore on, she began to feel worse rather than better. By morning, she was feverish and aching, her throat raw and her head pounding. She forced herself up, knowing the animals needed care regardless of how she felt, and made it through the morning chores on sheer determination. But when she tried to walk back to the cabin, the world tilted sideways and she fell, landing hard in the icy mud. She lay there for a moment, too weak to get up, and thought distantly that this was a stupid way to die. After everything she had survived, to freeze to death in a barnyard because she got sick would be almost funny if it weren't so pathetic. Then there were hands lifting her, a gruff voice muttering about stubborn fools, and she was being carried somewhere warm. When awareness returned, she was in the main house, wrapped in blankets on the couch, and old Samuel Fletcher was stoking the fire and putting a kettle on the stove. "Knew I should have checked on you yesterday," he grumbled. "Storm like that and you out here alone. Girl, you've got more grit than sense." "Animals," Beatrice croaked, already tended. "I'll handle the chores until you're back on your feet. Now drink this." He handed her a cup of something hot and bitter, some kind of medicinal tea that made her grimace, but she drank it obediently. Samuel stayed in Ethan's room that night and the next, checking on her regularly, making sure she drank fluids and ate a little broth. He was brusque and matter-of-fact about it, treating her illness as he would a foundering horse, efficiently and without fuss. By the 3rd day, her fever broke and she was weak but recovering. "You'll do," Samuel pronounced. "Tougher than you look. Now stay inside today and rest properly. I'll handle things outside." "Thank you," Beatrice said and meant it with all her heart. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." "Well, that's what neighbors are for. Ethan's helped me plenty of times over the years. And you, girl, you've got the makings of a rancher's wife if you decide to go that route. Not many city women could handle what you just did." He left before she could process that comment, and she was too tired to think about it deeply. But it stayed with her, rattling around in her head as she recovered over the next few days. Ethan returned on the 15th day, looking tired and sad but at peace. He found Beatrice in the barn, back to her regular chores though still not at full strength, and his face went through several emotions in quick succession when he saw her. "You're pale as a ghost. What happened?" "I got sick after the ice storm. Samuel helped. It's fine now. Fine." "Beatrice, you look like a strong wind could blow you over." He took the pitchfork from her hands. "Go inside and rest. I can handle this." "I've been resting for days. I need to work." They stared at each other, both stubborn, until Ethan sighed. At least tell me what happened." So she did, giving him the abbreviated version, downplaying her collapse and Samuel's rescue. But Ethan knew his neighbor well enough to read between the lines. "You could have died. But I didn't, because Samuel found you in time. God, Beatrice, if something had happened to you while I was gone." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I would never have forgiven myself. It's not your fault. It was my choice to stay and my mistake to push too hard during the storm." Still, he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm glad you're all right. I'm glad you're here." Something in his tone, in his eyes, made Beatrice suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the quiet barn, golden afternoon lights slanting through the gaps in the walls. She stepped back, confused by the feeling rising in her chest, something she had thought dead and buried with Thomas and Lucy. "How was your father?" she asked, desperate to change the subject. Ethan's expression closed off. "He died the day before I arrived. I was too late to say goodbye. But I helped my sister with the arrangements and we talked, really talked for the first time in years. She helped me understand that my father was proud of me, even if he didn't know how to say it. That's something, at least. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. It's strange grieving someone you had such a complicated relationship with, but I'm glad I went. You were right about taking the chance for peace." They stood in silence for a moment, two people who understood loss and complication and the weight of regrets. "I should let you rest," Ethan said finally, "but first I brought you something from Kansas." He pulled a small package from his coat pocket. "My sister runs a bookshop. When I told her about you, she insisted I bring this." Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound copy of a collection of poetry. Her hands trembled as she opened it, seeing the inscription on the first page. "For Beatrice, who takes care of my brother and his ranch, with gratitude and hope for your friendship. Margaret Zimmerman." "I told her you liked to read in your spare time," Ethan said, watching her reaction. "I hope that was all right. It's beautiful. Thank you." She clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it, by the idea that Ethan had talked about her to his sister, that he had thought of her while dealing with his father's death. "Well, I'll let you get back to it. Take it easy, all right. The ranch can wait a day." He left, and Beatrice stood there holding the book, feeling the cracks in her carefully constructed walls widening despite her best efforts to hold them together. December brought snow and shorter days, and a shift in the dynamic between Beatrice and Ethan that neither of them quite acknowledged, but both felt. They worked together more now, with Beatrice helping with outdoor chores when the weather allowed and Ethan occasionally assisting in the kitchen when she was preparing something elaborate. They talked more too, small exchanges that grew longer and more personal as the weeks passed. Beatrice learned about Ethan's childhood in Kansas, his complicated relationship with his father who had wanted him to be a shopkeeper, his deep love for the land and animals that had called him west. Ethan learned bits and pieces of Beatrice's life before, though she still couldn't bring herself to speak directly about Thomas and Lucy. One evening in mid-December, as they sat by the fire after supper finishing coffee, Ethan asked the question she had been dreading. "What happened to you, Beatrice? What made you so afraid?" She could have refused to answer. She could have gotten up and left, returned to her cabin and her solitude. But something in his gentle tone, in the way he waited patiently without pressure, made her want to tell him, so she did. She told him about Thomas, about their quiet, happy marriage, about Lucy with her dark curls and infectious giggle. She told him about the fire, about arriving home to find everything gone, about the suffocating weight of grief that followed. She told him about the whispers, the judgments, the way people looked at her like she was broken glass, dangerous to touch. "I had a fit at the funeral," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tried to throw myself into the grave with them. It took 4 men to hold me back. After that, everyone said I was mad, touched in the head, too broken to be around normal people. You weren't mad, Ethan said quietly. You were grieving. There's a difference. Is there? I can't go into small enclosed spaces without feeling like I'm suffocating. Loud, sudden noises make me panic. I have nightmares where I'm running through fire trying to find Lucy, but I never can. Does that sound sane to you? It sounds human. You lost everything in the most terrible way possible. That kind of trauma leaves scars, but scars don't make you broken, Beatrice. They just mean you survived something that should have destroyed you. She looked at him, this man who had given her work and shelter and something she hadn't expected. Acceptance. You really believe that? I do, and I'll tell you something else. Those people who called you broken, who whispered and judged, they're the ones with the problem, not you. They couldn't handle your pain because it reminded them that bad things happen to good people. That tragedy doesn't discriminate, and that scared them. So they pushed you away instead of helping you through it. That's on them, not you. Tears were sliding down Beatrice's face, the first she had cried in front of another person since that awful day at the funeral. I miss them so much. I miss my daughter and my husband and the life we had. And I feel guilty for even being here, for living when they're dead, for having moments where I'm almost content. Ethan moved to sit beside her on the couch, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Beatrice, they wouldn't want you to stop living. If they loved you, and I'm sure they did, they would want you to find peace, to find happiness again. That's not betraying their memory. That's honoring the love you shared by not letting it destroy you. How do you know that? How can you be sure? Because that's what love is. It wants the best for the people it touches, even after it's gone. She turned to look at him, this cowboy with his gentle wisdom and patient heart, and something clicked into place in her chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected, this feeling blooming where she thought nothing would ever grow again. Thank you, she whispered, for listening, for not judging, for seeing me as a person instead of a problem. Beatrice, you've never been a problem. From the moment I met you, I saw someone brave and strong and doing her best despite carrying a weight that would crush most people. I saw someone worth knowing. Their eyes met and held, and the air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. Ethan reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You're not broken, he said softly. You're perfectly made exactly as you are. The words hit her like a lightning strike, so opposite to everything she had heard for 3 years that she couldn't process them at first. But looking into Ethan's eyes, seeing the sincerity there, she wanted desperately to believe him. I don't know how to do this, she said, not entirely sure what this was but knowing something fundamental had shifted between them. Do what? Feel this way, about someone. Again, I'm terrified. Ethan's hand dropped from her face, but he didn't move away. Feel what way? She took a shaky breath. Like maybe there's a future that doesn't involve just surviving, like maybe I could want something more again. His smile was slow and warm like sunrise. That sounds like a good thing to me. But what if I can't? What if I try and I fall apart? What if I disappoint you? Beatrice, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. You could never disappoint me. We'll figure this out together at whatever pace you need. There's no rush, no expectations. I just want you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should given that you work for me, and if there's any chance you might feel the same way, I'd like to explore that. But only if you want to. I want to, she heard herself say, the words both terrifying and liberating. I'm scared, but I want to. Then that's enough for now. We'll take it slow. They sat together by the fire for a long time that night, not touching beyond their hands clasped between them, talking quietly about hopes and fears and possibilities. When Beatrice finally returned to her cabin well past midnight, she felt lighter than she had in 3 years, as if confessing her past, and her feelings had lifted some invisible burden. The next morning, things were different but also the same. They still worked together, still maintained a respectful distance, but there was an awareness between them now, an acknowledgement of something growing. Ethan would catch her eye across the kitchen and smile in a way that made her heart flutter. Beatrice would find excuses to brush past him, craving the simple contact she had denied herself for so long. Christmas approached, and Ethan asked if she wanted to go to town for the church service and social. Beatrice's first instinct was to refuse, uncomfortable with crowds and small talk, but Ethan's hopeful expression made her reconsider. "We don't have to stay long," he said, "but it might be nice to celebrate together. And I'd like to introduce you properly as someone important to me, not just my housekeeper." What will people say? Does it matter? She thought about that. For 3 years, she had lived in fear of whispers and judgments, letting other people's opinions dictate her life. Maybe it was time to stop caring what people said. "No," she said firmly. "It doesn't matter. I'll go with you." The Christmas social was held at the church in Pendleton, decorated with pine boughs and candles, full of families and couples and the smell of cinnamon and pine. Beatrice felt anxiety spike as they entered, but Ethan's hand on the small of her back steadied her. Sally from the restaurant spotted them first and hurried over with a delighted smile. "Beatrice and Ethan. Oh, I'm so glad you both came. How are things at the ranch?" They chatted for a few minutes, and Sally's genuine warmth helped Beatrice relax. Other people approached, some curious about the quiet woman with Ethan Zimmerman, others offering friendly greetings. Mr. Henderson from the hotel restaurant was there with his wife and actually smiled when he saw Beatrice, which she had never seen him do before. "You look well," he said gruffly. "Ranch life suits you." The evening passed more pleasantly than Beatrice expected. She stayed close to Ethan, letting his easy charm smooth over her social awkwardness, and found that people were generally kind once they got past their initial curiosity. When a few older women cornered her with probing questions about her relationship with Ethan, she answered honestly and simply. "He's a good man and I'm fortunate to work for him." "Just work?" one of the women asked with a knowing smile. "For now," Beatrice replied, feeling bold, "but maybe more in time, we'll see." News of that exchange spread through the social within minutes, and by the time they left, everyone in Pendleton seemed to know that Ethan Zimmerman was courting his housekeeper. Beatrice waited to feel embarrassed or anxious about being the subject of gossip, but instead, she felt almost proud. Let them talk. She had nothing to hide. On the ride back to the ranch, bundled in the wagon under blankets against the cold night air, Ethan glanced at her with amusement. "You were very forthright with Mrs. Peterson about us." "Was that wrong?" "Not at all. I'm just surprised." "You usually avoid being the center of attention." "I did. But then I thought about what you said, about other people's judgments being their problem, not mine. And I decided I don't care if people talk, as long as I know the truth." "And what's the truth?" She looked at him in the moonlight. This man who had seen her at her worst and stayed, who had given her space to heal and time to grow, who made her believe she could be more than her trauma. "The truth is that I'm falling in love with you, Ethan Zimmerman, and that terrifies and amazes me in equal measure." He pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road and turned to face her fully. "Beatrice Thompson, I've been in love with you since you showed up at my ranch with a carpetbag and more courage than you gave yourself credit for. I just didn't want to push you before you were ready. I'm ready. Or at least, I'm ready to try. I can't promise I won't have bad days. I can't promise the nightmares won't come back or that I won't panic over things that seem silly. But I can promise I'll try, if you'll be patient with me. I'll be patient with you for the rest of my life if you'll have me, Ethan said. And then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Beatrice kissed him back, pouring 3 years of grief and fear and unexpected hope into that kiss, and felt something fundamental shift in her soul. She was still scared. She was still scarred. But she was also alive and loved and ready to start building a future instead of running from the past. They made it back to the ranch sometime later, both giddy and a little goofy from kissing and confessing feelings. Ethan walked her to the cabin door, kissed her goodnight properly, and promised to see her at breakfast. Beatrice floated inside, changed into her nightgown, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling with a smile on her face. She thought of Thomas and Lucy, hoping they would understand, hoping they would approve. She thought they would. Thomas had always wanted her to be happy. Lucy had been too young to want anything except love and attention. But if she could have grown up, Beatrice thought she would have wanted her mother to live fully. She fell asleep without nightmares for the first time she could remember, and woke to Christmas morning sunshine streaming through her window. The rest of winter passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Ethan and Beatrice courted properly, with walks along the creek when weather allowed, evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing, and kisses that grew gradually more heated as Beatrice's comfort with physical affection returned. There were still hard days. Days when the panic rose without warning and Beatrice had to lock herself in the cabin until it passed. Days when the memories were so vivid she could smell smoke and hear Lucy calling for her. But Ethan was always there when she emerged, not demanding explanations, just offering quiet support and steady presence. "You don't have to be perfect," he told her once after a particularly bad episode. "You just have to be here. That's enough for me." In February, Samuel Fletcher stopped by and found them working together to repair a section of fence, laughing at some joke Ethan had made. The old rancher watched them for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "About time you two figured things out. I was getting tired of watching you dance around each other." "We weren't that obvious," Ethan protested. "Boy, you've been in love with her since October. And she's been looking at you like you hung the moon since at least December. Only blind folks couldn't see it." Beatrice blushed but didn't contradict him, and Samuel rode off chuckling to himself. In March, Ethan asked Beatrice to marry him. They were sitting by the creek in the early evening, watching the water flow past, the first hints of spring green appearing on the cottonwoods. It had been a good day, warm enough that Beatrice had shed her shawl and Ethan had rolled up his sleeves. "I know we've only been courting a few months," Ethan said, his hand finding hers. "And I know you might need more time. But Beatrice, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you if you're willing, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Beatrice's heart raced, but it wasn't panic this time. It was excitement, hope, joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." He produced a simple gold band, explaining that it had been his grandmother's, passed down from his father's effects. Beatrice slipped it on her finger and marveled at how right it felt. They were married in April, in the same church where they had attended the Christmas social. It was a small ceremony, just a few friends and neighbors, with Samuel standing as Ethan's best man and Sally as Beatrice's witness. Clara Martin wept happy tears throughout the entire service. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, with wildflowers in her hair picked that morning from the field behind the ranch. She walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, and found she didn't mind. This was her choice, her future, claimed by her own will. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Beatrice held her breath, half expecting someone to stand and declare her unfit, too broken, too damaged. But there was only supportive silence, and then Ethan was saying his vows, his voice strong and sure. I promise to love you in joy and in sorrow, in health and in hardship, to be patient with your struggles and celebrate your triumphs, to build a home with you where you always feel safe and valued. I promise to see you as you truly are, perfectly made and deeply loved, every day for the rest of our lives. Beatrice's vows were simpler, her voice shaking but determined. I promise to love you with all the pieces of my heart, even the broken ones. I promise to work beside you, to trust you, to build a future with you. I promise to try every day to be brave enough to accept the love you offer. They sealed their promises with a kiss, and Beatrice Thompson became Beatrice Zimmerman, a name that felt like a fresh start and a second chance. The reception was held at the hotel restaurant, Mr. Henderson's gift to his former employee. There was food and music and dancing, and Beatrice found herself actually enjoying the celebration, wrapped in the warmth of community acceptance. These people knew her story now, or at least some of it, and they had chosen to welcome her anyway. As evening fell and they prepared to return to the ranch, Sally pulled Beatrice aside. "I'm so happy for you," she said, squeezing Beatrice's hands. "You deserve all the joy in the world. Thank you for being kind to me when I first came to Pendleton. I don't think I ever told you how much that meant. You were hurting. Anyone with eyes could see that. I'm just glad you found someone who could help you heal." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Beatrice moved her few possessions from the cabin to the main house, to the bedroom she would now share with Ethan. She was nervous about this new intimacy, worried that the physical aspects of marriage might trigger memories or panic, but Ethan was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured against her hair as they lay together that first night. "There's no rush for anything." But Beatrice found that she wanted this, wanted him, wanted to reclaim this part of herself that trauma had stolen. So she kissed him and let herself be vulnerable, and when they came together, it was with tenderness and care and love that made her cry from the beauty of it. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, she said, "I didn't think I could feel this way again. Safe, loved, whole." "You were always whole, Beatrice. You just needed time to remember it." The years that followed were not without challenges. Beatrice still had nightmares, still had moments of panic, still carried scars that would never fully fade. But they were lighter now, integrated into the fabric of her life rather than defining it. She learned to trust her own strength, to accept help when she needed it, to believe that she deserved happiness. Ethan learned the patterns of her moods, how to support without smothering, when to push gently, and when to simply hold space for her struggles. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Beatrice proved to have a good head for business, keeping the books and managing finances while Ethan focused on the cattle and land. They made improvements each year, expanding the herd, improving the pastures, building a new barn. Their first child, a boy they named Thomas James, was born in the spring of 1885. Beatrice was terrified throughout the pregnancy, convinced something would go wrong, that she would lose this child like she had lost Lucy. But Ethan stayed steady, reminding her that each day was its own gift, and when Thomas was born healthy and squalling, Beatrice wept with relief and joy, holding her son. Looking into his scrunched-up face, she felt the ghost of Lucy's memory, but it didn't hurt the way it once had. Instead, it felt like a blessing, as if her daughter was somehow approving, glad that her mother had found a way forward. "Hello, little one," she whispered. You're named for two good men. I hope you grow up to be just as fine as they were." Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and said quietly, "She would be happy for you, you know. Both of them would." "I know," Beatrice replied, and meant it. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Lucy Ann, and this time Beatrice's tears were pure joy mixed with bittersweet memory. She could give her daughter's name to this new baby without feeling like she was replacing the first Lucy. They were both her daughters, both loved, one who had lived too brief a time and one who had her whole life ahead of her. Thomas and Lucy grew up on the ranch, learning to ride and work and appreciate the land. Beatrice and Ethan told them stories about the family members they were named for, keeping those memories alive without letting them become burdens. The children knew their mother had lost people before they were born, but they saw it as part of her story, not the defining feature of her existence. Samuel Fletcher became an honorary grandfather to the children, teaching them about ranching and animals and the importance of being good neighbors. The Martins' children grew up alongside Thomas and Lucy, becoming fast friends who played together whenever their families visited. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Beatrice sat on the porch in the evening, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 9, Lucy was 7, and Beatrice was pregnant with their third child, though they hadn't told the children yet. "You remember the first time you came here?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You looked so scared and determined all at once." "I remember thinking you were crazy for hiring me. I told you I was broken and you just said that didn't matter." "It didn't matter. It still doesn't. You were never broken, Beatrice. You were hurt, you were healing, but you were never broken." She leaned against him, content in a way she had never thought possible back in those dark days after the fire. "They used to say I was too damaged to love, too haunted, too much work. Well, they were fools. You were perfectly made for me exactly as you were, scars and all." "I love you, Ethan Zimmerman." "I love you too, Beatrice Zimmerman. Always have, always will." Their third child, a daughter they named Margaret after Ethan's sister, was born that winter. Thomas and Lucy were thrilled to have a baby sister, doting on her with the sweetness of children who had been raised in a loving home. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mix of joys and sorrows. There were hard seasons when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was the year of drought when they almost lost everything and had to ask for help from neighbors. There was the winter when Lucy got sick with fever and Beatrice spent 3 days without sleep nursing her daughter, old fears rising that she might lose another child. But Lucy recovered, and Beatrice learned that not every fear would come to pass. There were also beautiful moments. Thomas's first successful cattle drive at 16, coming home exhausted and proud. Lucy's wedding at 20 to a good young man from a neighboring ranch, the ceremony held in the same church where Beatrice and Ethan had married. Margaret's graduation from the Teachers' College in Portland, returning to Pendleton to teach at the local school. Through it all, Ethan and Beatrice remained partners in every sense. They worked side by side, raised their children together, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated triumphs as a team. Their love deepened and matured, becoming the foundation on which their entire lives were built. On a warm summer evening in 1903, Beatrice sat on the porch with Ethan, both of them in their 60s now, gray-haired and weathered but still strong. Their children were grown with families of their own, though they all lived close enough to visit regularly. The ranch was thriving, managed now by Thomas with help from his sister's husbands. "We've had a good life," Beatrice said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "We have," Ethan agreed. "Any regrets?" She thought about that seriously. "I regret the fire. I'll always carry that loss, but I don't regret what came after. Not anymore. I think I've finally made peace with it all, the grief and the healing and the joy we've built. You've come a long way from the woman who showed up here 20 years ago convinced she was too broken to deserve happiness. I had a good teacher. You showed me that being broken and being whole aren't opposites, that you can carry scars and still live fully. That love doesn't erase pain, but it gives you the strength to bear it. Ethan took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar gesture that had become their anchor. You did the hard work yourself, Beatrice. I just loved you while you did it. That was enough. You were enough. You are enough. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, surrounded by the land they had worked and the life they had built. Somewhere in the house, they could hear the laughter of their grandchildren, visiting for the weekend, and the sound filled Beatrice with deep contentment. She thought back to that girl of 23, standing at the edge of Pendleton with a single carpet bag and no hope left in her heart. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that it would be all right, that she would find her way through the darkness, that love and joy and peace were waiting on the other side of her fear. But maybe that girl wouldn't have believed it. Maybe she needed to walk the path herself, needed to learn through experience that healing was possible, that second chances existed, that being broken wasn't the same as being beyond repair. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked softly. "How grateful I am. For you, for our family, for this life. For everything that brought me here, even the painful parts, because they made me who I am." "And who are you?" "Beatrice Zimmerman," she smiled, the answer coming easily after years of struggle to find it. "I'm a woman who survived, who loved and lost and found the courage to love again, who built a good life from the ashes of tragedy, who learned that being perfectly made doesn't mean being undamaged. It means being exactly who you need to be, scars and all." "That's the wisest thing I've ever heard," Ethan said, kissing her temple gently. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Beatrice felt a presence, gentle as a whisper. It might have been imagination or memory or something more, but for just a moment, she could have sworn she felt small arms around her neck and heard a child's laugh on the wind. Peace, she thought. Lucy had found peace, and now, finally, so had she. The rest of their years were quiet and content. They watched their grandchildren grow, supported their children through their own challenges, and remained active in the Pendleton community. Ethan served on the town council for several years. Beatrice organized a women's support group at the church for others dealing with loss and trauma, using her own experience to help those who were struggling. When Samuel Fletcher died at the age of 91, Beatrice and Ethan were with him, holding his hands as he passed peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, Beatrice spoke about how he had saved her life that winter when she fell ill, and how his gruff kindness had taught her that good people came in all varieties. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new calves and green grass. Summer meant hard work under the hot sun. Fall brought harvest and preparation. Winter offered rest and reflection. Beatrice learned to find beauty in each season, both literal and metaphorical, understanding that life was a series of cycles, endings and beginnings eternally intertwined. On a spring morning in 1911, Beatrice woke to find Ethan already up, standing at the window watching the sun rise. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Beautiful morning," he said. "They all are when I'm with you." He smiled at her, the same warm smile that had first made her heart flutter nearly 30 years ago. "Have I told you lately that you're the best thing that ever happened to me? At least once a day for the past 3 decades, but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good. Because I plan to keep saying it until my last breath." They had coffee together on the porch, watching the ranch wake up around them. Thomas arrived later with his 2 oldest sons to help with the spring branding. Lucy and her family came by for Sunday dinner, as was their habit. Margaret stopped by on her way back from town with books she thought her parents would enjoy. It was an ordinary day, filled with family and work and small pleasures, and Beatrice treasured every moment of it. These ordinary days, strung together like pearls on a string, formed the necklace of a life well lived. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Ethan pulled Beatrice into his arms and held her close. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For saying yes all those years ago. For taking a chance on me and on us. For building this life with me. For being brave enough to love again when everything told you not to. For being you. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing in me when I had stopped believing. For loving me, not despite my brokenness, but as a whole person who happened to carry some scars. For giving me a reason to hope again." They kissed, and it was tender and familiar and still sparked the same warmth it always had. Then they climbed into bed, Beatrice curling into Ethan's side the way she had for nearly 3 decades, and fell asleep to the sound of each other's breathing. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. There were grandchildren's weddings and great-grandchildren's births. There were hard winters and plentiful harvests. There were losses, too, friends and neighbors passing on, the inevitable toll of time. But through it all, Beatrice and Ethan remained each other's constant, the anchor in every storm. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The whole community came, 3 generations of people who had known them, respected them, loved them. There were speeches and toasts and stories about the couple who had built a lasting legacy of love and hard work and kindness. Sally, now in her 80s, stood to speak. "I remember when Beatrice first came to Pendleton," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "She was so quiet, so withdrawn, and I worried about her. Then Ethan came along and something changed. Not overnight, mind you. But gradually I watched her blossom into the woman she was always meant to be. That's what real love does. It doesn't fix you or complete you. It gives you the space and support to become your truest self. Ethan and Beatrice, you've shown us all what that looks like. Thank you." Beatrice, now 73, stood with Ethan beside her to thank everyone for coming. 50 years ago, I stood in a church in this town and married the best man I've ever known. I was terrified that day, convinced I didn't deserve another chance at happiness. But Ethan saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He saw a whole person, worthy of love, capable of joy, strong enough to heal. He was right, though it took me years to believe it. Our life together has taught me that we're all perfectly made exactly as we are, flaws and scars included. Those imperfections are part of what makes us human, and being human is the most beautiful thing we can be. Thank you all for being part of our journey." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering when she finished. That night, alone in their room, Beatrice and Ethan held each other close. "50 years," Ethan murmured. "Feels like both forever and no time at all. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment good and bad because it led us here. I love you, Beatrice. I loved you at 28 and I love you at 78. I'll love you at 108 if we're blessed with that many years. I love you too, Ethan. Always and forever." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, peaceful and content, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. The years that remained were gentle ones. They gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting Thomas and his children to carry on the legacy. They spent their time with family, reading together, taking slow walks around the property, and simply enjoying each other's company. Beatrice never stopped having moments when the old memories surfaced, but they no longer had the power to destroy her. She had integrated her past into her present, understanding that she could honor Thomas and Lucy while still fully living her life with Ethan. She visited their graves whenever she traveled back to Kansas, bringing flowers and talking to them about the life she had built. She believed they would be proud. On a quiet autumn evening in 1937, as leaves turned gold and the air held the first hint of winter's chill, Beatrice and Ethan sat together on their porch one last time. They were both in their late 70s now, bodies worn but spirits still strong. "Remember when you first came here?" Ethan asked, a familiar conversation they had revisited many times over the years. "You had one carpetbag and the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you offered me a job without even knowing if I could cook." Beatrice laughed softly. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "It was the best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Beatrice thought about the long journey of her life, from the ashes of tragedy to the warmth of love rediscovered. She thought about the woman she had been, the woman she had become, and felt deeply satisfied with the path she had walked. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, as if reading her thoughts. "None," Beatrice replied firmly. "Well, maybe one. I wish we had more time. I wish we could have forever." "We have had forever. This life we've built, the love we've shared, the family we've raised, that's our forever. It doesn't end just because our bodies give out. Love like ours lives on in every person we've touched, every life we've influenced. That's immortality enough for me." "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best. From a woman who survived the unsurvivable and found the courage to love again. From someone who taught me that strength comes in many forms and the bravest thing you can do is keep living when everything tells you to give up." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and smiled. "They said I was too broken to love. Do you remember, back in Kansas after the fire? They said no one would ever want me, that I was too damaged, too difficult, too much work. And what did I say? You said I was perfectly made for you, that my scars were part of who I was, and you loved all of me, not in spite of my brokenness, but because of the whole picture of who I had become. I was right, you know. You were perfect for me, are perfect for me. Every single day we've had together has confirmed it." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who had found in each other everything they needed, everything they had hoped for, and more than they had dared to dream. The journey from that first meeting to this moment had spanned decades and encompassed a lifetime of experiences, but the core truth remained unchanged. Love, real love, didn't require perfection. It required presence, commitment, and the willingness to see each other fully and accept what you found. Beatrice and Ethan had built their entire life on that foundation, and it had held strong through every storm. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice whispered, "Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself, my love. I just had the privilege of walking beside you while you did it. Then thank you for walking with me, for never giving up on me, for showing me that second chances exist and that happiness is possible even after unbearable loss. It was my honor. Every single day, it was my honor." They remained on the porch long into the night, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air, watching the stars wheel overhead, holding the hands they had held for more than 50 years. When they finally made their way inside to bed, they moved slowly but together, still united in all things. Ethan passed peacefully in his sleep 6 months later, at the age of 82, Beatrice beside him holding his hand. He went without pain or fear, simply failing to wake one spring morning, his last breath drawn while dreaming of the ranch he had loved and the woman he had cherished. Beatrice mourned him deeply, but without the destructive grief that had once nearly consumed her. She had learned, over 5 decades together, how to hold sorrow and joy simultaneously, how to honor loss while still embracing life. She knew Ethan wouldn't want her to stop living, just as Thomas and Lucy hadn't wanted that so many years ago. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a matriarch respected and beloved. She continued to lead the women's support group at church, using both her experiences of loss to help others navigate their own grief. She told stories about Ethan, keeping his memory vibrant and alive, teaching the younger generations about the man who had built the ranch and the love that had sustained it. On a summer afternoon in 1942, Beatrice Thompson Zimmerman died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, in the same room where she had spent more than 50 years with Ethan, in the house on the Running Z Ranch that had become her home and her sanctuary. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, 3 generations of people whose lives she had touched. Her children spoke of her strength and courage. Her grandchildren shared stories of her kindness and wisdom. Her great-grandchildren, some too young to understand death fully, knew only that their beloved great-grandmother had gone somewhere they couldn't follow, but that she had loved them deeply. Sally's granddaughter, now running the restaurant in Pendleton where it all began, spoke at the service. "My grandmother told me stories about Beatrice all my life, about how she came to Pendleton running from her past, convinced she was too broken to ever be whole again, about how she met Ethan and slowly learned to live again, to love again, to trust in the possibility of happiness. My grandmother said that watching Beatrice and Ethan's love story unfold was like watching a miracle happen in slow motion. 2 people who found in each other exactly what they needed, who built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. That's the legacy Beatrice leaves behind. Not just the ranch or the family, though those are significant, but the lesson that we are all strong enough to survive what life throws at us, that second chances exist, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." They buried Beatrice beside Ethan in the small cemetery outside Pendleton, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the rolling hills she had loved. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, her children had inscribed the words Ethan had said to her so many times over the years, the words that had given her the courage to believe in herself again. Perfectly made, deeply loved, forever cherished. The Running Z Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and eventually his children's. The house Ethan built and Beatrice made into a home stood strong for generations, sheltering family after family, its walls holding memories of love and loss and everything in between. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the cottonwoods by the creek and the sunset painted the sky in gold and pink, those who lived there sometimes felt a presence, gentle and warm. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps it was memory, or perhaps it was the enduring essence of 2 people whose love had been so strong, so true, so perfectly suited to each other that it had literally become part of the land itself. They had said she was too broken to love. They had said no one would want her, that her scars ran too deep, that she was too damaged to ever be whole. They had been wrong. She had been exactly right for the cowboy who saw past the surface wounds to the strong, beautiful, resilient woman beneath. He had been exactly right for the woman who needed space to heal and support, to grow and love that asked for nothing but offered everything. Together, they had proven that broken and whole weren't opposites, that scars were evidence of survival rather than signs of weakness, and that the most powerful love stories weren't about perfection. They were about 2 imperfect people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful from whatever pieces they had to work with in the end. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.